All right, today let's talk breakouts, at least as far as hitters go. It's one thing to find a sleeper, which is somebody who you're taking late, somebody who's under the radar that can basically become something out of nothing, at least in terms of expectations. But when we talk about breakout, we're going either from nothing to something or from good to great. So I'll talk about several young hitters here, and some of them are very well known. But my favorite ones, at least the potential breakouts, are the last couple. So definitely want to check those out. But let's start from the top down. The first obvious name is a guy who a lot of people thought was going to break out last year, Wyatt Langford of the Rangers. And as a consequence, his ADP really jumped up towards the late end of draft season in March. All of a sudden, he became a very trendy pick, went from barely inside the top 100 all of a sudden to in the top 70, and people were drafting him way too early. I saw some people pulling the trigger in the round 5, and that just did not pay off. And that's the problem when we talk about these prospects who have this pedigree, and he definitely has it. And look, he was hot in spring and he has all the tools. I mean, he was in perfect situation really to break out. But then we remember, oh yeah, he has no major league experience. It takes time for some of these players, for most of these players. But when the hype becomes greater than the actual production is going to deliver, then you have a guy who basically was a bust. That is until the end of the season, because we saw what we were hoping to see and what we might see all of this season. Wyatt Langford looking like a stud. In September, he went off. In that month alone, he hit 300, 8 home runs, and 20 RBIs, and then even stole 7 bases. I mean, it was just such a huge difference from what he did in that month alone to basically the whole rest of the season beforehand. And it's not like there were injuries to blame. It's that adjustment period. And one thing that he did, and he's going to continue to do, is to kind of level out his swing. And a lot of young hitters do have the tendency to do this, even if they're not necessarily just slugging types, is to try to really tap into that power, right? They want to make an impression as a young player. And he talked a lot in the offseason about how he was putting too much weight on the back foot and trying to level up for that power. Got a little too vertical, but once he started to adjust and just try to make better contact, it happened. And really, if you look at his numbers overall, he didn't have a bad season. I mean, he wound up with a 253 average. It's okay. 16 home runs, 19 steals, and only a 20.6% strikeout rate compared to a 9.2% walk rate. That's really good for a rookie. And again, imagine if what he unlocked at the very end of last season, just imagine that extrapolated over a full season. Now, we can't expect that, of course, because players don't stay that locked in for a full season, very rarely. So as good as Langford is, don't get carried away and just realize you're going to have to pay up to get him, because right now his ADP is 40. He's going even earlier, as he should be, but I think he's absolutely worth it. This is a guy I'm taking ahead of other outfielders in that same range. Another second-year player that you're going to have to tap early on draft day if you really want to lock him in is Junior Caminero of the Rays. And the hype is just going to continue to grow, especially after his highlight reel monster home run and the swag that he showed afterwards. I mean, that whole display was pretty impressive. I got to say, this is why people are so impressed by Caminero, because he's got that huge raw power. Really, the only question with Caminero was when was he going to get the call, and we waited and we waited. We didn't get it until the second half of last season, which really isn't too surprising. And the Rays, I mean, they just went into full tank mode. So, all right, finally got a chance to see him, and he was okay. I mean, he was fine. His stats aren't anything overwhelming. He didn't put up a Langford-like end of the season, but he did show some of those underlying metrics that really just reinforce what we thought already. He is an elite slugger in the making. He has elite bat speed, is one of the best among all hitters who at least meet this threshold that I'm looking at in terms of plate appearances. That max EV, exit velocity, is excellent. And his barrel rate was still good. Of course, not a huge sample size, but we're going to get it this year. He's locked in to the starting third base job, and he's going to break camp right out of the gate with the team. So we'll see what happens here with Caminero. Will he deliver on his potential? I think he definitely can, and I think it's worth it. And of course, you're going to really hope he does if you're drafting him as early as potentially the top 75, but it's a risk worth taking. All right, now take 2 on a guy I really thought was going to break out last year and possibly would have if not for injury, Tristan Casas of the Red Sox. I mean, everything was going great. He was looking good start of the season, and then just the very end of April, before the month even ended, injured on the 60-day IL. We didn't see him come back until the middle of August. And then when he did come back, just really never got his feet under him consistently, showed some flashes, but clearly not the same. He still had a very strong barrel rate as well, 13.3%, did show his power and the plate discipline, at least sort of, and that's the one thing. This is a slugger who has always had a very good walk rate, and I think he definitely can hit for average. But his strikeout rate jumped up as well at the end of last year. I mean, near 30%. That's not good, but that's not something he had really shown beforehand. I still think he'll be fine. I think he can hit for a pretty decent average, maybe in the 280s. Most of the projection systems have him with something in the 240s, the highest being the new Oopsie model, 263, and the lowest is the Bat X down at 231. I think he can definitely do better than that. 280 maybe. That's a little optimistic, but he can do it. And I have full faith in him. He's going to hit in the middle of that Red Sox lineup, which is still a pretty good one. So Casas is going to be probably a better value than he was last year on draft day, because last year kind of wound up being a disappointment. But again, it wasn't because of underachievement. It was really just that injury just messed him up, the timing of it. And believe it or not, we're jumping all the way down to basically the last part of your draft in terms of a redraft league. Right now, NFBC, which is draft and hold, 239 is the ADP for last year's number one prospect, Jackson Holliday of the Orioles. Believe it or not, he's going much later than he was last year before he even debuted, and when we didn't really know when he was going to play in the majors. I think what people saw was already enough. They just are turned off by this guy who just turned 21 years old. Are we really getting prospect fatigue from a guy who's all of 208 plate appearances in the major leagues, and again is just 21 years old? I mean, come on. Now, I understand that he was bad enough when he first got the call that he had to get sent down, didn't come up till later in the season, and then couldn't keep a regular job in that Orioles lineup. But come on, there's enough talent here. He's got the power, he's got the speed, he's got the bat skills. Defensively, well, I don't care because that doesn't affect my fantasy team. Look, he's going to have a starting job for sure, at least the beginning of the season, assuming he holds on to it. And he's going to have a place in that O's lineup. It might be right now, as he projects, ninth or eighth in the lineup. But he definitely has an opportunity to move up if he hits. I'm taking that chance. I mean, the thing that was alarming about Holiday last season was the strikeout rate, 33.2%. Not good for anybody, but especially somebody who's known to hit for average and, again, not to be considered a power bat. But I don't think this will be a recurring issue. Has strikeout rate, well, under 20% for most of the minors. And when he got to AAA, it was just 22.3%. Yes, the majors are different, but he will acclimate. This guy who's a very fast riser through the system. And this is a very tough system with all the competition at Norfolk and throughout the O's farm system to climb up that high. So I don't think it's just the name and the hype and whatever. He earned his promotion. He's going to earn the starting job this year. And I bet he actually winds up having a really good season. You know, a second-year second baseman I might feel even better about is Colt Keith, a guy who is not getting as much hype because he's on the Tigers, not the Orioles. And some people may not even know yet that might not be the second baseman for the Tigers this year because he's going to be the first baseman. Yeah, Detroit got Gleyber Torres. He's going to hold down second. Keith is going to play first. That just adds another position of eligibility to him for fantasy. Don't worry about Spencer Torkelson because the Tigers clearly are not. They're probably going to keep him in Toledo for a little while until he figures things out. But Keith is going to have an everyday job. Again, might qualify at 3 positions in your fantasy league, depending on what they wind up doing to start this season. And he's going to be in there pretty much every day. Now, Keith had a very interesting 2024. It was a roller coaster ride for sure. You look at his monthly splits. In April, 163 average, no home runs, only 5 RBIs. He was pretty much dropped anywhere if he even was drafted. And then in May, he all of a sudden became a very interesting pickup after hitting 342 with a couple homers and 14 RBIs. And then fell back to the waiver wire after hitting 220 in June with only 5 RBIs once again. And then in July, it looked like this was it. This was the breakout. He was actually one of the best hitters in the month of July, hitting 322 with a 644 slugging because he went deep 7 times with 17 home runs. And August, you guessed it, back down again, only 1 homer, 11 RBIs, but a 264 average. And then September was just okay. So because of that, a lot of people just kind of forgotten about him. Now, he might wind up being a streaky hitter. And that's okay. That's really not the worst thing, especially if you're looking for a player that you can slot at any position and you're drafting toward the very end of your draft. You don't have to rely on him as your starter, but man, when he's hot, you're going to put him in there and reap the rewards. But of course, I think there's another gear here. This is a player, despite being a left handed hitter, actually hit better against lefties than righties, which is why he might be an everyday player. He hit 305 against left handers last year. Does not strike out a whole lot, only 19% of the time. He's going to make things happen on a regular basis in that lineup. So I really like Colt Keith. Very solid pick here and has definitely a much higher ceiling than people realize. All right, but this might be my actual favorite pick here as a breakout. I'm hoping it finally happens for Garrett Mitchell of the Brewers. I really liked him as a breakout candidate before the 2023 season, but if you know what's happened with Garrett Mitchell, you know how that season went for him. Toward the end of 2022, he debuted for the Brew Crew, hitting 68 plate appearances. He hit 311 with 2 home runs and 8 stolen bases. Looked like this was going to be a guy who, again, was going to be super valuable the following year and getting to hold down center field. But then was injured early and played a total of 19 games that year. So it was a lost season for him. And then, again, had my hopes up last year. And the same thing, believe it, a week before the season was going to start, fractured finger. That meant 60-day IL, didn't appear until July 1st last season. And so he finally did get some action toward the second half and was solid, hit 255 with 8 home runs and 11 stolen bases in 224 plate appearances. So I'm just hoping he can stay on the field and in a batter's box for most of the year, and then we'll see that elite speed. Again, you've seen a few steals here and there just in limited time. He's got a 95th percentile sprint speed. So not only is the speed legit, but the Brewers one of the teams that ran the most in terms of stolen base attempts per game last year. So I expect him to be a great candidate for 30, maybe even 40 steals. And he does have a fair amount of power as well. He's a guy who could go, again, 20, 30 and hit for average. That would be pretty nice. He may not be an everyday player, but man, he's going to make the most of the opportunities he has. And I'm going to throw one more hitter in here. Again, this is a dart throw for your very end of your drafts. You're looking for a hitter with some power upside. Not a rookie anymore, but Tyler Soderstrom should be the everyday first baseman now for the A's. Not the most exciting team to have a part of, especially on offense, but I think Tyler Soderstrom, now being the everyday first baseman, presumably for the Athletics, is someone you got to keep your eye on. Now, the downside here is he's a first baseman now and not a catcher. And I already checked on Yahoo. He's lost that catcher eligibility, which makes sense because he just didn't catch anymore. So that's a bummer, right? It's nice to have a guy with huge power that you put at catcher, but he's not. But still, even at first base, I mean, he showed some legit power last year, 9 home runs in 189 at bats, and he should be hitting maybe fourth or fifth in that lineup. Now, a lot of people are curious with the A's out of Oakland and playing in Sacramento, basically a minor league ballpark there. But looking into it, this is not going to play like you think a minor league park where, it's going to be like a little league. These guys are just going to be hitting home runs left and right. The dimensions actually are not that different from the Coliseum, but it should still play friendlier to offense in general because Oakland was not a good venue for hitters at all. Huge foul space there, right? And the fences. So this is going to be better, but from all accounts, what I've read is that it's going to be about league average. But that's better than what they had been dealing with in Oakland. So I like Soderstrom as a sneaky power play toward the end of your draft. And some people are in on Nick Kurtz, their prospect, who is also a power bat, more power than Soderstrom even. And sure, he could get in the mix. I won't deny that. Late in the season, he could be fighting with Soderstrom for playing time, maybe supplant him if things don't go well. But right now, I think Soderstrom obviously has that starting job, at least according to early depth charts. And I think he can make the most of his opportunity because he's shown that he can handle major league pitching. You may not get them all on draft day, but I suggest you take a chance on at least a couple of those breakout candidates because I have very high expectations for them this year. I also like these sleepers I talked about earlier for hitters. These are guys that are just going way under the radar.